Welcome to Midnight Mystery Tales, a channel where history's darkest secrets resurface after centuries of silence. Here we explore the stories that official records tried to bury, the truths hidden behind sealed doors, and the mysteries that refuse to remain forgotten. Tonight's story is not a legend, not folklore, but a documented historical anomaly. One so disturbing that archivists were ordered never to speak of it. The New Orleans Municipal Archives contain a financial ledger that has never been adequately explained. Buried among thousands of routine transactions from the winter and spring of 1840, one series of entries defies every known principle of economics, human behavior, and logic itself. Between January and May of that year, a single auction house on Chartres Street in the French Quarter recorded the sale of one woman 37 times. Not 37 different women. The same individual woman, sold again and again. Each transaction was meticulously documented with names, dates, and prices that climbed to levels no rational market could justify. Each buyer was a man of immense wealth and influence within New Orleans society. Most unsettling of all, every sale occurred exactly 11 days apart, without a single exception. No illness disrupted the sequence. No travel delays altered the rhythm. No external events broke the pattern. The timing was flawless, mechanical, and deeply unnatural. Every buyer paid more than the last, as if participating in an auction that never truly ended, where the hammer fell repeatedly, and the merchandise returned like a tide that refused to remain gone. When this ledger was transferred to the Louisiana State Archives in 1898, a chilling notation appeared in faded ink across the top of the pages: "Do not catalog. Do not reference in finding aids. Restrict access pending review by the Governor's Historical Commission." That review never happened. To this day, the pages remain sealed, guarded not by locks, but by bureaucratic silence. Researchers who stumble upon indirect references to this ledger find their access requests denied without explanation. What happened in New Orleans during those 5 months? Why was the same woman sold 37 times? And what compelled powerful men to surrender her after exactly 11 days? Only to watch her return to auction, where others fought desperately to possess what their predecessors had willingly abandoned. The answers survive only in fragments, in private journals destroyed by frightened families, in letters burned to ash, and in one extraordinary manuscript written by a man who witnessed every transaction and spent the rest of his life trying to understand what he had recorded. The woman was called Margaret. She was not treated as labor. She was not sent to fields or assigned household duties. Instead, she was taken into private studies, libraries, and locked rooms. For hours, sometimes entire nights, she spoke with the men who bought her. Servants heard voices, but never arguments. No shouting, only conversation. And when those doors finally opened, the men who emerged were not the same. Fortunes unraveled. Convictions collapsed. Men who had defended slavery as divine order freed their slaves without explanation. Others withdrew from society, burned lifelong records, dismissed trusted overseers, or dismantled their own estates. Whatever Margaret revealed to them during those 11 days shattered something fundamental within their minds. And yet, despite terror, despite ruin, despite knowing what awaited them, the next buyer always paid more. By April of 1840, fear had crept into the auction house itself. Regular bidders stayed away. Sellers avoided days when Margaret was scheduled to appear. Only those gripped by an irresistible compulsion entered the room. Confidence melted into desperation the moment bidding began. It was no longer a transaction, it was surrender. Then, suddenly, the sale stopped. Christophe Laveau vanished without record. Margaret disappeared from all documentation. And the ledger was sealed, as if history itself wished to forget what had happened on Chartres Street. The confidence slowly turned into desperation. Inside the auction hall, men bid against one another with an intensity that suggested they were competing for something far greater than valuable property. It was as if acquiring her was a test they had to pass, proof of their power, control, and superiority. And then, exactly 11 days later, they brought her back broken. The word never felt sufficient, but Etienne Delacroix could not find a better one. The buyers were not physically harmed. They could walk, speak, conduct business as usual. Yet something essential inside them had been destroyed. Their certainty about their place in the world. their comfort within systems that had enriched them, their ability to ignore the human cost of their wealth. All of it shattered within those 11 days. On April 9th, Pierre Sewell purchased her for $21,000. Sewell was no ordinary buyer. He was a prominent attorney and politician, a man whose legal arguments had defended slaveholders' rights across Louisiana. He was admired for his intellectual brilliance, his mastery of legal philosophy, and his ability to construct arguments that framed slavery not only as economically necessary, but morally justified. 11 days later, when Christophe Lavaux returned Marguerite to Maison de Lacroix, Ian managed a brief conversation with Sewell's law clerk, a young man who had worked for the attorney for 3 years. Lowering his voice, the clerk admitted that Sewell had not slept since the second night. He sat in his office surrounded by his own books, cases, briefs, and published articles, crossing through them with red ink. In the margins he wrote words like sophistry, moral cowardice, and elaborate justification for evil. He was dismantling his own life's work. When Etienne asked what Marguerite had said to him, the clerk shook his head. She had not argued or accused. She had simply asked questions, calmly and patiently, questions that demanded answers, questions that could not be escaped. By late April, whispers spread throughout New Orleans that something was terribly wrong at Maison de Lacroix. Respectable families warned their men to stay away from those auctions. Mothers cautioned their sons. Wives begged their husbands not to attend. Yet the warnings only increased the compulsion. Etienne recognized the psychology immediately. The auctions had become tests of courage and will. Men who believed themselves rational, powerful, and immune were convinced they would be different. Whatever had broken others, they believed, would not break them. Their arrogance made them perfect subjects for whatever education Marguerite delivered during those 11 days. The prices climbed beyond any rational measure of human value. $25,000, $30,000, $35,000. Entire plantations were being exchanged for 11 days of ownership. Men bankrupted themselves and returned her at devastating losses. Ian found himself unable to stop thinking about the pattern. His wife Margaret noticed his distraction, his fixation on the ledgers filled with impossible numbers. She told him he was letting it consume him, that he was merely documenting transactions. Etienne disagreed. Every time he accepted Marguerite back for resale, he was enabling the cycle to continue. He could refuse. He could end it. But Margot reminded him that another auction house would simply take the business. He would lose everything his grandfather had built, while the system continued unchanged. Etienne recognized that reasoning with growing horror. It was the same logic he had used for 15 years. He was just the auctioneer. He did not own plantations. He simply facilitated transactions between willing parties. Realizing this made him physically ill. By early May, Etienne began having nightmares. He dreamed of endless ledgers where names and prices bled into one another. Auction blocks stretching infinitely, Marguerite standing upon each one, her gaze cutting through every comfortable lie he told himself. He began making mistakes in his work, small errors his clerks caught before they became disastrous. Errors he had not made in 15 years. Jacques Renault, the investigator Etienne had hired, continued bringing reports, though he himself appeared increasingly disturbed. One servant described how Marguerite spent her 11 days, asking a planter to recount the lives of slaves he had owned. She knew their names. She knew details that existed nowhere in records. She forced him to remember them not as property, but as people. The man wept for days. Etienne asked how she could know such things. Renault admitted there was no trace of her past anywhere. It was as if she had no history, or one deliberately impossible to uncover. When Etienne asked what she was, Renault could only say that whatever explanation existed lay beyond rational categories. On May 5th, Valcoram arrived. He was the wealthiest planter in Louisiana, owner of a legendary sugar estate built on brutal efficiency and calculated death rates. He paid $43,000. Etienne felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The pattern was escalating. Each buyer represented a pillar of slavery's machinery, and now came its purest expression. 11 days later, the resale authorization returned. M's signature was barely legible. Scrawled repeatedly in the margins were the words for her 17 names. Lavo explained that Marguerite had made him calculate how many people had died on his plantation. Not numbers, names. Something he had never recorded. By the 29th sale, the highest price ever recorded in Louisiana had been paid. Marguerite looked directly at En, and in her gaze he felt absolute certainty that the pattern would reach him next. 11 days passed in agonizing anticipation. Etienne searched archives, questioned priests, and begged for explanations that would make sense. One elderly Jesuit told him that the question was not whether what he was encountering was supernatural, but whether it was evil or justice. On June 2nd, the 30th auction was set to begin. Before Etienne could speak, Christophe Lavo stepped forward and announced that the sale required a specific buyer, someone who had documented every transaction, someone who had profited while maintaining distance from responsibility. Ian understood immediately. When he refused, Lavo calmly listed the falsifications in Etienne's ledgers, the illegal accommodations he had made for buyers. Everything Etienne had justified for years. Marguerite spoke then, her voice precise and devastating. She told him that 15 years of selling human beings, while hiding behind paperwork, did not absolve him. He needed to understand ownership, not just record it. Faced with ruin either way, Etienne agreed. He spent 3 days dismantling his life, mortgaging his business, his home, his future. On June 5th, he conducted an auction where he was the only bidder. He raised his own hand and purchased Marguerite for $40,000. That night, she arrived at the auction house and began asking questions. Simple at first, then specific. Transactions. Names, families separated, children sold, elderly discarded. She knew details Etienne had buried even from himself. Night after night, she continued. She recited thousands of names. She forced him to confront not abstractions, but lived experiences. She dismantled every justification he had relied on. By the 9th night, he stopped sleeping. By the 10th, he admitted that if he could return to the beginning, he would never have entered the business. Marguerite corrected him gently. He had always known. He had simply chosen not to see. On the 11th morning, she told him he would authorize her resale and live the rest of his life with the knowledge she had given him. He asked what she was. She replied that it did not matter. Whether she was exactly what she appeared to be, a woman sold 30 times by men who found truth unbearable, or something else entirely, the facts did not change. Etienne Diacroix had spent 15 years as an instrument of systematic cruelty. That truth remained, regardless of her nature. When he asked whether it would ever end, whether the pattern would finally stop, she answered calmly that 7 more sales remained. 37 in total, a number, she said. That would mean something to anyone who studied theology as carefully as they studied their ledgers. 7 more men would be destroyed. Then she corrected herself. 7 more men would learn what they had chosen to ignore. Destruction, she explained, was simply how truth felt when comfortable lies became impossible to maintain. That afternoon, Etienne authorized her resale. Christophe Lavo accepted the documentation without comment, preparing the 31st transaction with the same mechanical precision as the previous 30. Etienne recorded the loss in his ledger: $40,000 spent, perhaps $20,000 recoverable. $20,000 lost for 11 days of education that had destroyed his peace forever. The money meant nothing. What Marguerite had taken from him was far more devastating: his certainty, his moral distance, his ability to treat human suffering as routine business. All of it was gone. In its place remained understanding, raw and permanent, like a wound that refused to heal. The remaining 7 sales unfolded with ritual precision. Every 11 days, Marguerite returned to auction at Maison de l'Aqua. Every 11 days, another prominent man purchased her for a higher price. And every 11 days later, that man authorized her resale, broken by whatever education she had provided. The 31st buyer was a wealthy merchant who financed scientific expeditions. After his 11 days, he could no longer look at account books or calculate profit. Commerce itself became unbearable. The 32nd buyer was a devout Catholic who defended slavery through Scripture. After his time with her, he freed every enslaved person he owned and withdrew into a life of isolation. The 33rd buyer was a riverboat captain who had transported thousands of enslaved people upriver. He sold his boats and left Louisiana, unable to continue calling human beings cargo. By the 35th sale, New Orleans society began to fracture. Too many powerful men had been affected. Too many families disrupted. Too many fortunes damaged. Whispers spread through the city of curses, divine judgment, and supernatural punishment for slavery's sins. The church took notice. Archbishop Antoine Blanc called a private meeting with several of the affected men, hoping to understand what was happening. None could explain it. How do you admit that truth itself destroyed you? How do you tell a bishop that you bought a slave who forced you to see your own evil? Etienne attended because of his meticulous records. When the archbishop finally asked what he believed was happening, Etienne answered carefully. He said they were not witnessing divine intervention or supernatural punishment, but consequence. Men had built wealth by treating people as property, while keeping themselves comfortably distant from the reality of what they were doing. That distance had been removed. What was happening now was not destruction, but revelation. The 36th sale occurred on August 9th. The buyer was Laurent Millardin, one of the city's most powerful bankers. He paid $63,000, the highest price ever recorded. 11 days later, Christophe Leveau returned with authorization for the final sale. 37. The pattern was complete. The final buyer appeared on August 23rd, when the auction house filled beyond capacity. Before Etienne could begin, Christophe Leveau announced that this sale required someone who embodied the system itself, law, politics, and moral justification combined. Then the doors opened, and Judah P. Benjamin entered. Brilliant, confident, and untouchable, Benjamin believed that whatever had destroyed the others could be mastered through intellect. He raised his hand immediately. $60,000. No one challenged him. 11 days later, Benjamin returned transformed. He signed the resale authorization with shaking hands. Every argument he had built, every legal and philosophical defense of slavery, had collapsed under her questions. What he had believed was reasoned morality was nothing more than sophisticated self-deception. Marguerite then stood in the center of the auction hall. She told Etienne to document the final moment. And then she faded, not dramatically, not violently, but quietly, as if she were becoming less real. Within moments, she was gone. Christophe Leveau said only that the education was complete. Etienne never saw him again. The aftermath unfolded slowly. Some of the 37 freed their slaves and withdrew from society. Others continued their lives, but with visible torment. Judah P. Benjamin rose politically. But those close to him noticed something broken behind his eyes, as if he were engaged in an argument that never ended. Etienne sold Maison de l'Aqua 3 years later. He tried to escape the memories, but they followed him. He died at 53. His final words were names, dozens of them, people he had sold decades earlier. The ledgers survived. When archivists cataloged them decades later, they found something impossible: 37 sales of the same woman, every 11 days, prices escalating with mathematical precision. Access to the records was quietly restricted. It still is. There is no birth record for Marguerite, no death record, no trace of her before January 1840 or after September 3rd. And so the questions remain. Was she human angel, or something beyond understanding? Or was she simply truth, delivered in a form powerful men could not escape? The evidence exists. It waits in sealed archives. And if this story unsettles you, that may be the point. Because sometimes justice does not arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as understanding, and understanding can destroy you.